a decorated cop, a dark family secret, and a truth so horrifying it pushes him over the edge. Ryan Carson had always believed his mother was just a strict woman until he uncovered the twisted crime she hid for decades. The truth shattered his world, but what he did next, no one saw it coming. This shocking true crime story will leave you speechless as Ryan unravels the nightmare lurking beneath his own childhood. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chilling true crime stories. Now, let's begin. Detective Ryan Carson had seen it all. Gruesome crime scenes shattered families and the darkest sides of humanity. But nothing prepared him for the case that would break him. It started with a simple welfare check in Blackwood, Texas, a quiet suburban town where nothing ever seemed to happen. A neighbor had reported a foul smell coming from the home of Eleanor Hayes, a single mother known for a quiet demeanor and polite smiles. Ryan knocked on the door, his gut already twisting. When Eleanor didn't answer, he pushed inside and was hit with a stench so thick it clawed at his throat. The living room was pristine, decorated with family photos and scented candles, yet something was deeply wrong. As he moved toward the basement door, his boot stuck to the floor. He looked down, a dark stain smeared across the wooden planks. His pulse pounded. Gripping his gun, he descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, the scent of decay suffocating. His flashlight flickered over a row of small, makeshift beds. And then he saw them, tiny, lifeless bodies lined up like discarded dolls. Ryan staggered back, bowel rising in his throat. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Oh, detective!" Eleanor's voice was calm, almost mocking. She stood at the top of the stairs, smiling. "I was wondering when you'd find out." Ryan's world fractured in that moment, and he snapped. Ryan's hands trembled as he stared at the horrific scene before him. The bodies, small, fragile, rotting. His mind refused to process it. How long had they been here? Who were they? His stomach twisted as his flashlight flickered over tiny name tags on each bed. These weren't random victims. They were children. Eleanor took slow, measured steps down the stairs, her expression eerily serene. "You shouldn't have come here, Ryan," she said softly, tilting her head like a scolding mother. Ryan's gun was already drawn. "Get on the ground. Now." But Eleanor only chuckled. "You think you know the truth? You don't." Her eyes gleamed in the dim light. "You don't even know who you are." A sudden, nauseating realization struck him like a hammer. These children, why did some of the names feel familiar? He took a shaky breath, scanning the tags again. And then, his entire world collapsed. There, among the lifeless bodies, was a tag that read, Matthew Carson, his brother's name. Ryan stumbled back, the room spinning. "No, that's not possible," he whispered. Eleanor's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Oh, darling," she murmured, "you've always been so blind." Ryan's breath came in short, ragged gasps. Matthew Carson, his little brother, the one who had mysteriously gone missing when Ryan was just 10 years old. His parents had told him Matthew had been kidnapped. They had spent years searching. But now here he was, a name tag on a child's corpse in Eleanor Hayes' basement. His hands clenched around his gun. "What the hell is this?" he growled, his voice barely steady. Eleanor sighed, almost bored. "I was hoping you'd never find out, Ryan," she murmured, stepping closer. "I raised you better than that." Ryan's mind blanked. "Raise?" His pulse thundered. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor's eyes darkened, and she gave a slow, deliberate smile. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not just some woman in this town." She paused. "I'm your mother." The word sent a shockwave through Ryan's body. No, that wasn't possible. His mother had died in a car accident when he was a teenager. His father had grieved for years. He had seen the funeral. But now, staring into Eleanor's knowing gaze, something inside him cracked. Memories resurfaced. Strange whispers in the night, the way his father never spoke of his mother's past, the nightmares of a woman's laughter echoing in his childhood home. "No," he whispered, shaking his head violently. "You're lying." Eleanor leaned in, her voice a soft hum. "Then why do you look so much like me, baby?" And just like that, Ryan Carson's world was rewritten. Ryan's world tilted on its axis. Eleanor's words clawed at his mind, unraveling everything he thought he knew. "I have a mother," he spat. "She died when I was 16. Her name was..." His breath hitched. He tried to say her name, but his mind went blank. Panic gripped his chest. Eleanor watched, a sinister amusement dancing in her eyes. "You can't remember, can you?" She took a step closer. "That's because the woman you called mother was just a cover. Your father took you away from me. He tried to erase me from your life." Ryan's grip on his gun tightened. "You're insane." Eleanor sighed. "Am I? Then why do you remember your father crying at night? Why did he move you 2 states away when you were 10? And why?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you still have nightmares about a woman calling your name in the dark?" Ryan staggered back, his pulse hammering. He did remember those things. The whispers, the night terrors, his father's unexplained grief. His chest heaved. "That still doesn't explain this." He gestured to the lifeless children. "What the hell did you do?" Eleanor smiled, soft and maternal. "I gave him a home." Ryan felt something inside him snap. His finger hovered over the trigger. "You murdered them." Eleanor's eyes darkened. "I saved them." And suddenly, Ryan knew this woman wasn't just his real mother. She was a monster. Ryan's hand shook as he pointed his gun at Eleanor, his supposed mother. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted was too monstrous to accept. Eleanor exhaled, almost tired. "I love them, Ryan. The world is cruel to children, you know that." Her voice softened, just like it was cruel to you and Matthew. Ryan flinched at his brother's name. "Matthew, what did you do to him?" Eleanor's smile faltered. "I saved him from your father," she said, "just like I tried to save you." Ryan's vision blurred with rage. "Save him? He's dead." His voice cracked. "I spent my whole life thinking he was kidnapped, when all along he was here, in this house, his throat closed up, in a goddamn basement." Eleanor's expression darkened. "You don't understand, Ryan. Your father took you away from me. I was trying to take you both back, but he fought me. I got Matthew first, but your father was too strong. He took you before I could bring you home." Ryan felt sick. "So you locked Matthew down here?" Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "I protected him, but he was too weak to survive." She sighed, "Just like the others." Ryan's stomach twisted. The others, the rows of tiny beds. His mother, the woman who had given him life, was a child killer. And now, she was looking at him like she wanted him to understand. Ryan's grip on his gun tightened, because now, for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he had to do. Ryan's breath came in sharp, ragged bursts. Eleanor wasn't just a murderer. She was his mother, and she had been hiding in plain sight his entire life. His mind flashed back to childhood, his father gripping him tightly, whispering, "She can't take you too." The nights filled with screams he didn't understand. The unspoken rule in their house: never ask about Mom. Now, standing in her basement of horrors, he finally understood why. "You kidnapped Matthew," Ryan said, his voice like ice. "You stole him from us." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. "I brought him home." Ryan's stomach churned. "Home? You kept him in a goddamn basement." His voice cracked. "And when he died, what did you do? Just move on to another child." Eleanor exhaled slowly, like a mother scolding an ignorant child. "I only took the ones who needed me, Ryan. The ones the world had already abandoned." Ryan's pulse thundered. "You killed them." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "I gave them love." Something inside Ryan snapped. His finger twitched on the trigger. He had taken down serial killers before, but this was different. This was his mother. Eleanor tilted her head. "Are you to shoot me, sweetheart?" Ryan's grip tightened. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But then she said something that made his blood turn to ice. "You won't do it," she whispered, "because you're just like me." Ryan froze, and for the first time, he wasn't sure she was wrong. Ryan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Eleanor's words slithered into his mind. coiling around his deepest fears. "You're just like me." His grip on the gun wavered. No, he wasn't like her. He protected people. He fought against monsters like her. Didn't he? Eleanor took a slow step forward. "You feel it, don't you?" Her voice was like a lullaby. "That pull, that hunger. You wouldn't be a cop if you didn't crave control, Ryan." His breath hitched. "Why do you think you always chase the worst criminals?" she murmured. "Because they fascinate you." Her smile was serpentine. "Because deep down you wonder what it would feel like to be the one pulling the trigger, to have the power." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Shut up." Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "Your father tried to erase my blood from you, but he couldn't." She stepped closer. "Because you were always meant to come home." His hands trembled. He wanted to scream that she was wrong. But why did her words feel too close to the truth? Eleanor reached out, her fingers almost brushing his cheek. "Let me show you, Ryan." And for one terrifying second, he almost let her. But then a sound, a faint creak from upstairs. Someone was in the house. Ryan's instinct snapped into place. He shoved Eleanor back and spun toward the stairs, gun raised. But as he did, Eleanor lunged. And this time, she wasn't holding back. Ryan barely had time to react before Eleanor struck. Despite her age, she moved with terrifying speed, her nails raking across his arm as she lunged for his gun. He twisted, fighting her off, but she was relentless. "You belong to me, Ryan," she hissed. "You always have." Ryan threw her back, sending her crashing into a shelf. Jars of preserved souvenirs tumbled, shattering against the cold basement floor. The stench of decay filled the air. The creak upstairs grew louder. Someone was coming. Eleanor's breathing was ragged, but she laughed. "They'll never understand you like I do," she whispered. "You'll always be alone, Ryan, just like me." Ryan's chest heaved. She was trying to get into his head again, to plant out like a parasite burrowing into his brain. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. A second intruder. Ryan's pulse spiked. Was it backup? A civilian? Another one of Eleanor's victims? Eleanor's lips curled. She knew who it was. Ryan lifted his gun. "Who's there?" A figure stepped forward, the dim light catching their face. And Ryan felt the ground drop beneath him, because standing at the top of the stairs, eyes hollow, was Matthew, his dead brother, alive. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. His gun wavered. It wasn't possible. Matthew was dead. He had spent his whole life believing it, grieving it. But there he was, grown, breathing, staring back at him. "Matt?" Ryan's voice barely escaped. Matthew stepped forward, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow yet knowing. "Hello, Ryan." His voice was raw, like he hadn't used it in years. Ryan's mind spun. Had Eleanor lied about his death? Had Matthew been alive in this house all along? Eleanor's laughter slithered through the room. "Did you really think I let my own son die?" Ryan's grip on his gun tightened. "You said he was gone." Eleanor's expression softened. "I only said he didn't survive." She turned to Matthew. "But he did, didn't you, my love?" Matthew's expression didn't change. He stood there, silent. Ryan's stomach churned. His brother's posture was rigid, his eyes distant, like he wasn't fully there. "What did you do to him?" Ryan growled. Eleanor tilted her head. "I raised him, Ryan." Her smile was eerie. "I saved him from the cruelty of the world." Ryan's skin prickled. Was Matthew brainwashed? Trapped? Was he here willingly? Matthew's gaze flickered to Ryan's gun, then back to his face. A silent message. Ryan's pulse quickened. Matthew wanted him to do something. And then, before Ryan could react, Matthew moved. Straight toward him. Ryan barely had time to react before Matthew lunged. Instinct kicked in, Ryan sidestepped, gripping his gun tightly. But Matthew was fast, unnaturally so, his movements precise and calculated. Ryan's heart pounded. This wasn't the brother, he remembered. Matthew's hands clamped onto Ryan's wrist, forcing the gun downward. "Put it down," he murmured. His voice was calm, but his grip was crushing. Eleanor stood behind them, watching with a twisted sense of pride. "You see, Ryan, Matthew understands now. He sees the truth. Ryan gritted his teeth. What truth? That you turned him into your puppet. Matthew's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. Ryan's mind raced. His brother was alive, but he wasn't free. He had been raised under Eleanor's control, conditioned to obey. But there was something else, that flicker of hesitation. Ryan took a gamble. "Matt," he said, his voice low, urgent. "She's lying to you. She's been lying your whole life." Matthew's grip faltered. A split second, but it was all Ryan needed. With a sharp twist, Ryan yanked free and threw his brother off balance. Matthew staggered back, his face unreadable. Ryan lifted his gun again. "You don't have to listen to her." Eleanor stepped forward. "Oh, but he does." Ryan's gut tightened, because in Matthew's hand, a knife gleamed under the dim light, and this time he wasn't hesitating. Ryan's pulse pounded as Matthew gripped the knife, his knuckles white. "Matt," Ryan said carefully, keeping his gun steady, "you don't have to do this." But Matthew's jaw was tight, his eyes conflicted. He took a slow step forward, knife poised. Eleanor watched with twisted delight. "He's not your brother anymore, Ryan," she purred. "He's mine, and he knows what happens to traitors." Matthew's hand trembled. Ryan saw it, the hesitation. His real brother was still in there, buried under years of manipulation. Ryan took a calculated risk. He lowered his gun. "You're not a killer, Matt," he said firmly. "You're not like her." Matthew's breathing grew uneven. His grip on the knife faltered. Eleanor's smile vanished. "Matthew," she snapped, "do it." Ryan saw a flicker of panic in Matthew's eyes. Then a decision. With a sudden movement, Matthew spun, but not toward Ryan. The knife plunged into Eleanor's side. She gasped, eyes wide, stumbling back. She clutched her stomach, blood seeping through her fingers. "You..." she rasped, disbelief flashing across her face. Matthew's hand shook. "I'm not yours," he whispered. Ryan exhaled sharply, relief flooding his chest. But Eleanor's shock lasted only a moment. Then, with a twisted grin, she whispered, "You still don't understand, do you?" Before Ryan could react, she lunged for something behind her, and suddenly, the entire house went dark. The lights cut out, plunging the basement into suffocating darkness. Ryan's muscles tensed. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Then, a sharp scraping sound. "Matt, get back!" Ryan warned, raising his gun blindly. A low chuckle echoed from the shadows. Eleanor, even wounded, she was still playing her sick game. "You think you've won," she rasped. "You don't even know what you're up against." Ryan's grip tightened. "Come out, Eleanor. It's over." A sudden crash, shelves toppling. Ryan whirled toward the sound, but something slammed into him from the side. They hit the floor hard. Ryan's gun skidded away. A second later, pain erupted in his side. Warmth spread across his ribs. He'd been cut. Matthew's voice rang out. "Ryan!" Footsteps darted across the floor. Ryan rolled onto his knees, breathing through the pain. Eleanor was moving fast despite her wound. She had something. Metal glinted in the darkness. Ryan lunged, his hands locked onto her wrist. They struggled, her strength shocking. Then, a sickening snap. Eleanor cried out. Ryan wrenched the weapon from her grasp, a rusty scalpel coated in blood. She staggered back, panting. But even now, in pain, bleeding, she smiled. "You can't escape what you are, Ryan," she whispered. Ryan's stomach turned. He knew what she meant. And in that moment, he realized the truth. This wasn't just about Eleanor's crimes. This was about him. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps. The scalpel felt like ice in his grip. Eleanor, slumped against the wall, smiled through the pain. "You feel it now, don't you?" she whispered. Matthew hovered beside him, his chest rising and falling fast. "Ryan, don't listen to her." But Ryan couldn't shake it. The creeping realization. This wasn't just about Eleanor's crimes. It was about his blood, his past. "You've always had it in you," Eleanor murmured. "You were just too blind to see it." Ryan's fingers twitched. Memories flashed. His father's cold rage. The way Ryan used to clench his fists as a boy when kids picked fights. How, deep down, he always feared losing control. "You think you're better than me," Eleanor continued, voice weak but sharp. "But when you snapped, when you pulled that trigger," she coughed, blood staining her lips. "Did it feel good, Ryan? Did it feel right?" Ryan swallowed hard. It had. For one brief, twisted moment, it had. Matthew grabbed his arm. "Ryan," he said urgently, "don't let her win." Ryan blinked. The scalpel in his hand felt heavier now. Eleanor's eyes gleamed, despite the blood staining her teeth. She was right about one thing. Ryan wasn't the same man who walked into this house. But whether that was a good thing or a curse, he didn't know anymore. Ryan tightened his grip on the scalpel, Eleanor's words poisoning his thoughts. She was dying, yet she still held power over him. Matthew's voice cut through the haze. "Ryan, let's end this the right way." Eleanor's laughter was weak, but mocking. "You don't even know what the right way is, do you?" Ryan's jaw clenched. He wanted to end this, to silence her forever. But Matthew was right. He couldn't become her. Ryan took a slow breath and dropped the scalpel. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the dark room. Eleanor's smirk faded. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're supposed to be like me." Ryan stared at her, the woman who had destroyed lives, manipulated, and murdered. A woman who had tried to break him. "You don't get to decide who I am," Ryan said. His voice was steady, certain. Eleanor's body sagged against the wall. The blood loss was finally catching up to her. Her breathing grew shallow. For the first time, she looked afraid. "Matthew," Ryan said, "let's go." But Matthew didn't move. He stared at Eleanor, his face unreadable. "She never loved us," Matthew whispered. "She only wanted control." Ryan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "And she doesn't have it anymore." Eleanor tried to speak, but only a ragged breath escaped. Her eyes, once full of twisted amusement, now held nothing. Then her body went still. The monster who had haunted them was finally gone. But the damage she had done, that would never die. Ryan and Matthew stumbled out of the basement, the weight of the past crushing their chests. The house was silent now, the stench of blood and decay lingering. Eleanor was gone, but her influence still lingered, like a shadow neither of them could shake. Matthew leaned against the wall, his face pale. "It's over," he muttered, more to himself than Ryan. But Ryan wasn't so sure. The air felt too heavy, his hands still trembling. He had spent his life hunting monsters, and now that the biggest one was dead, what was left? Matthew's voice broke his thoughts. "What now?" Ryan swallowed, looking at his brother. "We walk out of here," he said, "and we don't look back." Matthew nodded slowly, but as they stepped toward the door, Ryan paused. His eyes drifted to the basement. For years, Eleanor had hidden secrets down there. Bodies, lies, and twisted manipulations. And now, she had left him with one more, himself. Because no matter how much he denied it, for a brief moment in that basement, he had understood her, and that terrified him more than anything else. Ryan and Matthew stepped outside, the cool night air hitting them like a wave. For the first time in years, Eleanor's grip was gone. Yet, freedom felt heavier than they expected. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors stood outside their homes, whispers spreading like wildfire. Ryan's hands curled into fists. He had spent his career bringing criminals to justice. But what happened tonight? This was personal. Matthew's voice was hoarse. "Do we tell him the truth?" Ryan exhaled. What was the truth? That they found out their mother was a monster? That she had killed their father, countless others, and tried to destroy them too? Or that, for a brief moment, Ryan had almost become her? "No," Ryan said. "We tell them she's dead. That's all they need to know." Matthew looked at him for a long moment before nodding. The sirens grew louder. This was the beginning of the end. And yet, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling. Some ghosts don't stay buried. The red and blue flashes of police lights painted the night as officers swarmed Eleanor's house. Ryan and Matthew stood at the edge of the yard, watching as their mother's legacy unraveled. Detective Cole, A man Ryan had worked with for years approached. His sharp eyes flickered between them. What the hell happened here? Ryan's pulse pounded. He had lied before, to criminals, to suspects, but never like this. "She's dead," he said, keeping his voice steady. "That's all that matters." Cole's expression darkened. "And you had nothing to do with it?" Ryan hesitated. He had pulled the trigger. He had watched Eleanor bleed out. But did that make him a murderer? Matthew spoke up. "She attacked us. We defended ourselves." Cole studied them, his silence stretching. Then finally, he sighed. "You know, Ryan, I always thought something was off about her." Ryan didn't respond. Because off wasn't the right word. Evil was. Cole gestured toward the house. "You should get out of here. Let us handle the mess." Ryan didn't argue. He and Matthew turned away, leaving behind a house of horrors. But as they walked into the night, Ryan knew he would never truly leave, because the real nightmare, it had followed him out. The house disappeared behind them, but Ryan felt its presence lurking in his mind. He and Matthew drove in silence, the weight of the night suffocating. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, much like their future. Matthew finally spoke. "What if we never escape her?" Ryan's grip tightened on the wheel. "We will." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. His mother's voice still whispered in his head. "You're just like me, Ryan." He clenched his jaw. No, he refused to be. They pulled into Matthew's driveway. As the car idled, Ryan turned to his brother. "You should get some rest." Matthew scoffed. After the night, neither of them would sleep. They both knew it. Ryan exhaled. "We made it out. That's what matters." Matthew's eyes were dark. "Haunted, did we?" Ryan didn't answer, because deep down he wasn't sure anymore. Ryan sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at nothing. His body was still, but his mind was a battlefield. His phone vibrated. A message from Matthew. "I can't stop hearing her voice. How do we move on?" Ryan didn't have an answer. He got up and paced, his mother's final words playing on repeat. No matter how much he tried to silence them, they clung to him like a curse. He walked to the bathroom and turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on his face. As he looked up at the mirror for a split second, he swore he saw a reflection instead of his own. His breath hitched. It was in his head. It had to be. The past was dead. And yet, it still had its claws in him. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Matthew. "Maybe we should do something to make sure this never happens again." Ryan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Maybe Matthew was right. Maybe the only way to truly kill a monster was to ensure no one else became one. But was that even possible? Ryan sighed, staring out at the city lights. Eleanor was gone, but the war she started? It wasn't over yet. Ryan met Matthew at a quiet diner, the air between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Neither had slept much. The ghosts of their past weren't letting go. Matthew pushed a cup of coffee toward Ryan. "I've been thinking," he said. "We spent our whole lives ignoring the truth about Mom. What if we make sure no one else does the same?" Ryan frowned. "What are you saying?" Matthew's fingers drummed against the table. "We start something, a foundation, an outreach, whatever it takes to educate people on spotting manipulation, abuse, and the signs of monsters like her." Ryan exhaled. He had spent years enforcing the law, chasing criminals. But what if they could stop people from becoming victims in the first place? The idea settled in his chest. It felt right. He nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." For the first time since Eleanor's death, it felt like they had control. But as Ryan sipped his coffee, a thought lingered in his mind. Monsters don't just disappear. And no matter what, he would always be watching. The foundation started small, just a website and a few social media posts raising awareness about psychological abuse and manipulation. But within weeks, it grew. Survivors reached out. Some shared stories of parents like Eleanor. Others had been in relationships with people who controlled and destroyed them. Matthew handled most of the outreach, but Ryan struggled. Every testimonial, every tragic story reminded him of their mother. One evening, as he sat in his apartment, his phone rang. Matthew's voice was urgent. There's a woman who needs help. Her husband is exactly like Mom. Ryan's stomach twisted. Where is she? Matthew hesitated. Here, she came to us. Ryan exhaled. This was bigger than them now. The past had nearly destroyed them, but maybe, just maybe, it could help save someone else. Still, a question lingered in Ryan's mind. What if the next monster was already out there? Waiting? Ryan pulled into the parking lot of their small foundation office, his pulse steady, yet his mind restless. Was he ready for this? Inside, Matthew sat across from a woman in her early 30s, bruises on her wrist, fear in her eyes. She was living their nightmare. I didn't know what to do, she whispered. He controls everything. My money, my friends, even what I wear. And when I try to fight back, her voice broke. Ryan clenched his fists. It was Eleanor all over again. Matthew leaned forward. You're not alone. We can help. Ryan's throat tightened. They had once been helpless. Not anymore. As the woman wiped her tears, Ryan knew this wasn't about their past anymore. It was about preventing another Eleanor, another victim, another tragedy. But as he walked to the window, staring at the world outside, a chill ran through him, because deep down he knew something else. There was always another monster waiting to rise. And when it did, he would be ready. The end.